10 interceptors. That is what stood between a hypersonic missile and 7 of Israel's highest-ranking military commanders. 10 of the most sophisticated air defense projectiles ever deployed in the Middle East, fired in rapid succession, each one representing billions of dollars in research and decades of engineering, every single. One of them failed. When the smoke finally cleared over a reinforced command bunker specifically built to protect the people inside it, 7 senior Israeli officers were dead, killed by a single missile that no defense system on the planet could stop. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep analysis matters to you, if you want to understand the world not through sound bites but through the actual mechanics of what is happening, subscribe right now, because this is the kind of story most people will never fully understand, and we are going to change that today. To make sense of this moment, you have to understand the context that led to it. For months, the Middle East had been building towards something catastrophic. Iranian-backed forces were striking American assets across the region. Israel had been conducting operations inside Iranian territory. The United States had repositioned carrier groups and deployed forces at a pace that intelligence analysts were calling unprecedented in the modern era. Behind all the carefully worded statements and diplomatic posturing, both sides were preparing for a conflict that went far beyond the proxy skirmishes that had defined previous years, and then the threshold was crossed. The United States and Israel launched a large-scale coordinated military operation against Iran. The exact trigger remains disputed, as it always does when governments are both participants in the same war, but what is not disputed is what Iran did the moment that operation began. Iran did not respond with fighter jets. They did not launch a swarm of slow, cheap drones the way regional powers typically respond in asymmetric conflicts. Instead, they reached for a weapon the world had heard about in press releases and military parades but had never seen perform in real combat conditions against real targets. With real consequences, the weapon is called the Fattah-2, and to understand why its first use sent shockwaves through every major defense establishment on the planet, you first need to understand something fundamental about how air defense systems actually work, because the Fattah-2 was built specifically to break them. Modern missile defense rests on one foundational assumption. When a missile launches, it follows a predictable arc through the atmosphere. Physics dictates the trajectory. Radar detects the missile early in flight, computers calculate where it is going based on the path it is currently taking, and an interceptor is launched to meet it at a mathematically determined point in space. Every system built to defend against missiles, THAAD, Patriot, Iron Dome, Arrow, all of it is built on that single assumption. The target will behave the way physics says it should. Track it long enough and you can predict where it will be, and you can kill it. The Fattah-2 was engineered to make that assumption worthless. What makes the Fattah-2 categorically different is not just its speed, though the speed alone is extraordinary. It is the combination of that speed with a hypersonic glide vehicle. Think of the weapon into parts. There is the rocket booster, which does exactly what rockets do. It burns hard, accelerates the payload into the upper atmosphere, and then its job is finished. But on top of that booster sits a second, maneuverable vehicle that separates at altitude and begins doing something that invalidates every defensive calculation made up to that point. It pitches and rolls, it shifts direction, it skims through atmospheric layers at extreme velocities, not on a fixed arc, but according to its own guidance system, constantly adjusting, constantly making the air defense computer's last calculation irrelevant. Iranian officials have stated that the Fattah-2 travels between Mach 13 and Mach 15, which translates to roughly 15,000 to 18,000 kilometers per hour. A missile at that speed, launched from western Iran, reaches targets across the Middle East in under 10 minutes from launch to impact. And during those 10 minutes, the missile is not sitting still on a predictable path. It is maneuvering, it is actively changing course. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is make interception not just difficult but, based on everything observed that day, effectively impossible. This is the core reason 10 interceptors failed, not operator error, not a malfunction. The physics of the engagement were structurally tilted in favor of the incoming weapon. What makes this reality even more striking is who said so publicly, not an Iranian general celebrating a victory, not a commentator offering analysis from a comfortable distance, a vice president at Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, one of the most technically sophisticated and respected defense companies in the world, the Israeli firm responsible for building many of the interceptors that failed that day, went on the record. He stated plainly that weapons like the Fattah-2 have opened a new era in air defense and that conventional interception approaches cannot be considered reliable against them. The analogy he used was clear and unsparing. He compared defending against a hypersonic glide vehicle to putting a single defender against someone operating at a completely different physical level. You can chase, you can run as hard as the system allows, but when the people building your defenses tell you those defenses have a structural ceiling and the threat has exceeded it, that is not a theoretical warning, that is a status report. Now consider what was targeted, because the choice of objective was not incidental. The Fattah-2 was not aimed at a runway, a fuel depot, or a communications tower. It struck a hardened, reinforced command and control facility, a structure built with layered concrete and steel specifically to keep the people inside it operational. Even while everything above them was being destroyed, the 7 officers killed inside that bunker were not support staff. They were senior commanders directly responsible for directing the ongoing military operation against Iran, and the precision required to hit them specifically inside a fortified structure while traveling at Mach 15. In evading multiple layers of air defense represents an engineering achievement that most nations with far greater resources than Iran have spent decades trying to replicate. One word deserves particular attention here: debut. This was the first time the Fattah-2 was ever fired in an actual combat situation. Not a refined system with years of operational feedback, not a weapon that had been tested in a lower-stakes engagement before being trusted with a critical target. This was its first real-world use, and it did not miss. The decision to debut an untested weapon against the most fortified target in the entire operation tells you everything about how confident the Iranian military was in what they had built. On the day it mattered most, that confidence was completely justified. The IDF command facility was not the only target struck during this phase. Reports from Iranian military sources and regional correspondents indicate that Fattah-2 missiles were also directed at American military installations in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. These are high-value bases protected by the most advanced air defense architecture the United States has ever deployed in the Gulf: THAAD batteries, Patriot systems, overlapping radar coverage, and interceptor capacity. By all available accounts, the results followed the same pattern as the command center. The missiles arrived, the defenses engaged, the missiles hit their targets anyway. The implications for the United States are not abstract or distant. They are direct, immediate, and deeply uncomfortable. American military strategy in the Middle East has rested for decades on a specific assumption about force protection. The assumption that American bases remain survivable in a hot conflict because of the defensive umbrella positioned above them. The assumption that adversaries, even well-armed ones, cannot reliably penetrate that umbrella with precision and speed sufficient to create strategic effect. That assumption now has a visible crack in it. Every service member stationed in the Gulf is currently operating inside a threat environment that the defensive architecture around them was built for a different era to handle. Addressing that gap is not a matter of weeks. It is a matter of years and billions of dollars that do not yet exist in any budget. The resource problem makes the strategic problem significantly worse. Before this conflict began, American stockpiles of interceptor missiles for Patriot and THAAD were already under pressure from the rate of consumption in Ukraine. Replenishment timelines were already a source of concern among planners before a single Fattah-2 was ever fired. Layered on top of that supply problem is the realization that even the interceptors currently in inventory may be fundamentally mismatched against this specific threat. The arithmetic is unforgiving. If defeating one hypersonic glide vehicle requires multiple interceptors fired in salvo and the intercept rate remains as low as observed, then any sustained campaign involving these weapons drains defensive inventories faster than the industrial base can rebuild them. That is not a manageable problem in the short term. Defense analysts have been working on theoretical frameworks for years: zone-based interception models, overlapping coverage fields across multiple altitudes and trajectory windows. The idea of compensating for hypersonic speed and maneuverability through sheer density of interceptor layers. In concept, these approaches have genuine merit. In practice, building that architecture requires years of development, years of procurement, years of crew training, and expenditures in the tens of billions years. While this conflict is unfolding right now today, with no pause built in for the defense community to catch up, the gap between what the threat requires and what current systems can deliver is real, acknowledged, and not going to close quickly. There is also a deeper strategic dimension that rarely surfaces in mainstream coverage, but that shapes everything else. Israeli military doctrine has been built for decades around a specific guarantee regarding command survivability. The logic is straightforward: even in the worst conceivable attack scenario, even if forward positions fall and air assets are destroyed and bases are degraded, the command structure, the generals, the planners, the decision-makers who direct the response, survive because they are in hardened facilities that adversaries cannot reliably penetrate. Preserve command authority and you preserve the ability to respond, adapt, and determine. The outcome, that guarantee, was what the bunker was designed to deliver. The Fattah-2 struck through that guarantee and killed 7 of the people it was supposed to protect. The strategic consequences of that single fact reach outward in every direction. Every gathering of senior officers now carries a question mark that did not exist before this strike. Every command center, no matter how reinforced, now carries a vulnerability that was not part of the previous strategic framework: the practice of concentrating decision-making authority in one location, which is not a flaw in how militaries operate but a fundamental feature of how they function effectively, has become an exploitable weakness in a way it simply was not before. The logic of targeting an adversary's leadership and decision-making capacity rather than their fielded forces is not new. What has changed is whether the weapons required to pursue that strategy reliably exist. After the Fattah-2's combat debut, the answer to that question is different than it was before. When serious analysts work through the available options in response to all of this, they keep arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. If you cannot reliably stop these weapons in flight, if the interceptor technology has not caught up to the threat, then the only credible path toward defensive security means addressing the launchers before they ever fire. That means offensive operations inside Iranian territory. It means a willingness to escalate beyond anything the current exchange has seen. It means a fundamentally different kind of war, with fundamentally different risks and consequences that are genuinely difficult to calculate from where we currently stand. There are no clean options here. Every path forward carries weight that extends far beyond the immediate military equation. It is also essential to place this inside the broader global picture because the Fattah-2 does not exist in isolation. Russia has hypersonic systems that have seen use in Ukraine. China has developed hypersonic glide vehicles with investment and scope that dwarf what Iran had available. North Korea has conducted its own hypersonic tests with varying degrees of documented success. The world has been moving toward this technological threshold for years, and what happened in the Middle East is the moment that trajectory became impossible to dismiss or minimize. The similarities between the Fattah-2 and Russian hypersonic programs are not coincidental, technical. Knowledge and engineering expertise have been moving between these nations through channels that Western intelligence agencies have been monitoring with increasing alarm. What Iran put on the battlefield is partly a product of that international transfer of knowledge, and Western sanctions were specifically designed to prevent exactly that outcome. Perhaps the most consequential message embedded in all of this is the one directed outward at every nation watching from the outside. A country operating under severe economic isolation, cut off from mainstream defense supply chains, working with a fraction of the budget available to NATO members, successfully developed and deployed a weapon that defeated the most advanced air defense systems the Western alliance had positioned in the region. If Iran can do this under those conditions, the barrier to entry for hypersonic capability is lower than Washington or Tel Aviv had allowed themselves to believe. That recalibration of what is achievable, that downward revision of the threshold, changes the global security equation in ways that will take years to fully understand. We are living through a moment that will have its own chapter in the history of warfare, not because hypersonic weapons are a new concept. The theory has existed in defense literature for decades, but because this was the moment the theory stopped being theoretical and became undeniably, visibly, physically real. Test data can be questioned. Claimed specifications can be disputed. Intelligence assessments can be minimized by those who prefer not to confront what they suggest. What cannot be minimized is physical evidence: a destroyed command center, 7 dead generals, 10 failed interceptors. That evidence does not require classified access to understand. It does not require a military background to process. It is simply and starkly what happened. The defense community is now at the beginning of a reckoning whose full shape has not yet come into focus. New interception technologies will be developed and funded under extraordinary urgency. New doctrines for protecting command infrastructure will be written. New debates about force posture, forward deployment, and the viability of current defensive models in contested regions will move from theoretical to operationally urgent. All of that lies ahead. All of it takes time and resources and years that the current conflict does not offer as a courtesy. The line between before and after was drawn on the day 7 senior officers died inside a bunker that was specifically built to keep them alive. What comes next will determine which direction history moves from that line, but the line itself is now permanent, and the weight of what it represents is something every serious conversation about modern warfare will have to account for a very long time to come.